Nous attendons un peu que les collègues portent le casque.
Communicate with you directly in the French language. However, in most part of my presentation, I will be using photos instead of text. And I will try to speak as slowly as possible so that our interpreters could accurately translate everything. I come from UNFCCC. This is the organization under the UN that's responsible for helping government coordinate the efforts in negotiating and agreeing on the actions to combat climate change. And my office is a partnership office between UNFCCC, United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and the West Africa Development Bank, BOAD in French. And I believe here in Central Africa, you should also have one corresponding finance institution, Central Africa Development Bank, if I understand it correctly. So, whoops, this doesn't seem to be working. Okay, here we go. My presentation will cover mainly these aspects. In fact, I added the first point only last night. What is green? Having noticed what colleagues have been talking about since yesterday, then I'll give you a very brief introduction of what's happening under the UN related to climate change. And in fact, as we held this workshop here in Tchad, in Poland, there is an international conference going on with representatives coming from every government, including coming from Chad. And they are deciding, they are negotiating, and hopefully by the end of this week, they will come to a conclusion on how to implement the Paris Agreement on climate change. Then I'll spend one slide on the context in Tchad, based on my research. And the main component of my presentation is to give you some real-life projects, cases related to climate action that has a huge potential in Africa, particularly in Central West Africa. And this is based on our real-life experience. So what is green? As colleagues have been discussing over these couple of days. First of all, we have to recognize there is no international, universal definition on what is green. However, most institutions and most people would generally come to agree that if you want to call something green, then it has to be something that generally involves an activity that protect the environment or the ecosystem. It can be something that protects it, to restore it, or to preserve the nature, something like that. Or it could be some action to address the climate change issue. How many colleagues do not know about climate change or have never heard about it? Nobody. So I'm very glad. So everybody is at least aware of the climate change issue. And any actions that could optimize the energy, resource, or material efficiency could be generally considered as heavy green. Then, based on what we heard since this couple of days' elaborations, I would tend to believe that there's this lighter dimension of green which links to social, for example, social inclusiveness, the gender benefits, health benefits, and security benefits. What I would like to focus my talk on will be the climate change actions. What kind of activities in Chad and in your country could be linked to climate change? basically, this is any green activity, in my opinion, that could bring benefit to climate change. And the UNFCCC was adopted in 1992, 26 something years ago. And then Kyoto Protocol, the Protocol of Kyoto, was the first international treaty under UNFCCC, and it entered into force in 2005. The very famous Paris Agreement on climate change entered into force in November 2016. That's 2 years ago. And the goal is obviously to halt the increase of global temperature, average temperature, to well below 2 degrees above the pre-industrial level, and try to achieve 1.5 degrees increase. Because this is the demand of most vulnerable countries, for example, those small island countries, because they are sinking under the water. And then under Paris Agreement, this is something I would like to bring to your attention. There is one terminology. In French, it's called contribution déterminée au niveau national, NDC. I heard a few colleagues were announcing it. So this is the commitment each country presents to Paris Agreement, to the international world, of what this country wants to do in order to help achieve the ultimate goal of Paris Agreement. And then obviously Paris Agreement also has heavy provisions to promote adaptation to climate change. What is adaptation? It is human efforts to try to adapt, to get used to the already changing climate. Or in other words, to increase the resilience against disasters caused by climate change. So you could interpret it in that way. And to address climate change, we need to promote climate actions. What are climate actions? What are we talking about here? Generally, it is widely agreed that there are two major baskets of actions. One is called mitigation, in French, atténuation, and one is called adaptation. Then mitigation is everything having to do to reduce your current level of emissions of greenhouse gases. So your current emission is somewhere here. Tomorrow or next year, you implement a green activity, it brings down, it reduces your emissions. So this is related to mitigation. Adaptation, as I briefly mentioned before, is activities that would reduce your vulnerability of social and biological system to relatively sudden change, and thus offset the impact of climate change. So this is adaptation. Then obviously under Paris Agreement, there is one important element which is called transparency. This is related to I'll give one example. Many countries in our region, by our region, I refer to Central West Africa. There are many climate actions happening. However, it's not being reported. It's not being recognized at the international level because there's no transparent framework being put in place to recognize in the country. And there are some renewable projects, for example, that is in fact contributing to reducing the emissions. Then you would need an MRV, measurement, reporting, and verification system being put in place to prove that such actions took place and such actions get recognized, and how much is their impact. And by the way, simply by putting this system in place, you already create jobs. And yeah, once again, climate action can bring employment opportunities along the entire value chain. When you implement some of the projects that I will be talking about shortly. A very brief introduction regarding the context that we are facing in Chad. When I was invited by Christian to the workshop, I thought I have no knowledge about Chad. Then I Googled and found some of this information, which I believe colleagues have been talking about over these past couple of days already. And I believe any green, regardless of whether it's green or dark or red or yellow, if there are such kind of employment, I believe the fundamentals are the most important picture we need to keep in mind when we design employment schemes, right? So again, I cited this information from different sources, so they may not be totally correct, but I trust they should be generally reflecting the reality. We see a largely agriculture-oriented economy, then quite limited amount of industry and services. And what's very interesting, Mr. Van der Rie already mentioned yesterday, Chad has a very young population. If we notice among the 14.9 million people, 64%, that's a huge percentage, is under age 24. This is a very young population, and then less between 25 and 54, and the median age is only 18. Again, I'm not sure if this is totally accurate. This is based on this link that I consulted, and the population growth is rather healthy. However, if we look on a wider scale, again, from my research, I learned that from now until 2030, then further to 2050, the majority of world population growth, something like 70% of the growth, of the increase in population will come from Africa. So there will be a lot of pressure in resources, in food, in energy, as we can imagine. And one other thing, when we promote employment, especially green employment, is the literacy and education, which I thought to mention as well. So we have rather, I would consider rather low level of education, which has been highlighted by other colleagues already. But in any case, as you will see, some of the projects that I will mention to you, they do not quite require so much education, and they could still bring decent jobs to our young people. This is a solar heater project. What I noticed here is in the evening time, the temperature is rather low, around 17, 18, 19 degrees. So this may be relevant for some households, for some hotels, for example. This is a solar water heater project in South Africa. This is the Eco Bricks project in India. And we watched one of the videos, if I recall correctly. There's another Eco Bricks project from Kenya, if I recall correctly. This is another type of green activity that could be done by young people to improve the built environment using eco-friendly materials. Because in doing it this way, it doesn't require sintering, meaning that you don't have to burn a whole lot of fossil fuels to make the bricks. Then you can directly use them for construction work. And again, I will have a few more slides on solar projects. This particular project is in Peru. I haven't obtained permission from African projects to use their photos. So I use these that are in our database that I can cite and use. And the purpose is to show to you that you have a huge potential here in Chad, throughout Central West Africa. In a little tiny small piece of land in Morocco or Burkina Faso or Algeria, you put enough solar panels as such, it could power up the entire world with enough electricity. And to give you more ideas, and this can be so big. It can be on the mountains, it can be also in the farmland, and these projects are in my country, in China. There are many solar panels being put in large part of the country. Literally anywhere you visit, you see loads of those solar panels, and you can do large project like this. You could also do it much smaller, just to power up a village. You see, we have a happy farmer here and some farming activities combined with solar energy. So you could consider promoting the same. One thing to keep in mind is once you put it in place, electricity comes. The initial investment is high, but after that, there's free electricity. And you continue to use the same labor to expand the project into other villages, because the solar industry is a very complex industry. It can create a long chain of value, value chain, and a large part of that can be kept inside Chad. It's not just the job opportunities go to China. It's not the case. I believe those solar panels exported to Europe, America, Africa, they probably create more jobs locally rather than and by the way, in China, by the way, the production of the solar panel is heavily polluting, which I don't want to get into. For the purpose of this, this is a solar cooking project, a very interesting project that was implemented under the UNFCCC's Kyoto Protocol CDM, in French MDP, Clean Development Mechanism. And we have tens of thousands of households, farmers' families, using facilities like this to cook and to boil water. This is a wind project. During lunchtime, I had an interesting exchange with Mr. Van der Rie. 6 years ago, I took a visit to the Gambia, to Banjul. There I met an interesting German gentleman, and he was doing a very interesting project. He brought, to my surprise, 3 second-hand windmills much smaller than this. And they entirely powered up the villages around. And because the wind was most of the time there, and it was European quality, and he told me it could easily run for another 20, 30 years. So what I noticed during dinner time yesterday evening, we had a lot of wind here in Chad. We could utilize such free resources to power up, to electrify some of our villages as well. And by the way, the second-hand equipment, they're not expensive. But I'm not promoting them, obviously. And this is a larger scale wind farm from China. Also, these under these you can combine agriculture activities, livestock. Sometimes. This is a project that I will spend more time to elaborate tomorrow. Today, this is nearly reaching the end of my presentation, but I want to mention it to you. Does everybody know what this is? No? No? It's called biodigester. In French, biodigester. Biogas. what it does, you build a tank under the ground, and on one side of it, you take the animal manure, the waste from your cow, from your mouton, from, I understand Chad is more Muslim dominated, so you may not have pigs. Then in Eastern Africa they have more pigs. So just 2, 3, 4 animals is enough to feed such a biodigester. What do you do with this? Traditionally, the 70-80% of our women's time is spent looking for energy, firewood, to cook for the whole household. It damages the forest, it creates environmental degradation, and it brings a lot of harm when this is burned indoor. The WHO estimates that there are millions of deaths being caused due to this type of indoor burning. And the health problem related to open air burning of firewood on women and on children is enormous. So what you do with the biodigester is you can use the gas for cooking and for lighting. And tomorrow I will show you. I will show you more. There are many other green activities that can promote climate protection. I'm not going to show you too many photos, but I just want to name them and to prove to you you have a huge potential within this region, and all these activities have relatively large potential to either reduce the emissions or to help the economies adapt to the changing climate. One thing is renewable charcoal, charbon, durable. Traditionally, people chop down trees, and there's a whole lot of agriculture wood and straw that can be used to produce renewable charcoal, and they reduce emissions. And another thing is efficient cooking stoves. Instead of the open fire indoor, you use efficient cooking stoves which burns much less for the same cooking results. The next one is waste handling, for example, composting. The next one is clean water or water filtering, because water is another challenge, not only in Africa, in Asia, Latin America as well. And then wastewater treatment, and then forest and reforestation, forest management, I believe some colleagues already mentioned. And we already had a lot of talks regarding organic and climate smart agriculture, in French, climate intelligent agriculture, and that's largely linked to adaptation. And I was sitting with our colleague from Tchad yesterday, and he was talking about the irrigation. Remember I showed you about the solar panels? In many countries nowadays, they are using solar panel to pump water and to do automated watering of their crops and farmlands. So this could be an opportunity for green business in your country as well. This is my last slide. I just want to highlight that there are many opportunities inside Central Western Africa that could create a green value chain, meaning, and the number of jobs, they do not necessarily require high education, university degrees, no. You put the youngsters having received some basic educations into a training center, you invite some trainers from Europe, America, China, elsewhere, or even within Central West Africa. I believe we are starting to have more and more competent people who are able to do this, and to promote green employment can help achieve the Sustainable Development Goals and Paris Agreement. And they bring many co-benefits. They protect environment, they grow your economy, and social inclusion, gender equality, The project, especially the biodigester one, has a huge benefit to food security, energy security, and also public health. And for a country like Chad, I believe when you have a stable employment situation, your national security situation could improve as well. Then what I personally wanted to recommend to you is to talk to your colleagues in finance ministry, in central bank. They are very important stakeholder. In your commercial banks, to put appropriate measures, support measures to support such projects, and to engage the commercial banks to make available green credit. This is what is happening in China. Since 2 years, China has been piloting some very innovative green finance instruments. I will give you one example which might work in this region as well. What they do, if farmers come for a green project, agriculture related, they don't even need to visit the branch office of the bank anymore. They submit their proposal online, and the bank staff members take a quick look at it, and they see it is a green activity. Then they approve it in a few minutes, and then the money is on the bank account but obviously up to a certain limit. But it's enough to kickstart their project, and they have been so successful. We talked about the Cameroonian case of 60% recovery, and they had higher over there. And the central bank of China has put in a whole lot of policy instruments to support green finance projects and green employment. For example, if you give your loan to a green project, then you could use that loan to get a refinance facility from the central bank, meaning that the central bank give very cheap, low-cost credit to the commercial bank. Then the commercial banks could give the credit at a very low interest rate to support the farmers' actions. And I believe this could have a huge impact on the agriculture sector here as well. So I would very much encourage you to consider talking to your colleagues in those authorities to consider working with you to promote your green initiative. And obviously, what's needed, I think a national or local green development guarantee fund is very much needed, but most likely you end up not spending the money at all, because those activities, they were able to repay their loan. And you should also talk to your environment ministry, get yourself engaged in the NDC, nationally determined contribution process, so that your efforts gets integrated into a wider national and international process, so that your contribution gets recognized. It also helps you to go onto a wider platform to promote your activities. Next year in March, we're going to have the African Climate Week in Accra. And it was through this forum I realized that public employment services can be a natural, strong ally of global climate action. So you are very much welcome to talk to your environment ministry colleagues to get yourself involved. Thank you so very much, colleagues.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Liang, for this very inspiring presentation with a lot of perspective for a lot of people within this, from this audience. Merci. Maintenant, nous allons ouvrir, comme d'habitude, un slot des questions pour la salle. Mr. Liang, if you would like to come near me, please. Donc, je vais vous demander de poser vos questions. Essayez de les poser de manière courte et d'assez simple pour que les interprètes puissent assez facilement traduire. Merci beaucoup. Je vois beaucoup de mains levées, donc on va prendre le temps. Donc, je vais commencer.
Thank you.
Ma question est la suivante.
My question is the following.
Dans notre domaine,
In our field,
c'est un domaine énorme à pouvoir
Yes.
beaucoup d'emplois.
a domain that will provide a lot of work, but we don't have financing. Other institutions that found as private
Nos banques
institutions
locales ne sont pas,
because our local
c'est pas moi je
banks
peux dire, mais
are not in
aujourd'hui,
it.
même si vous avez un marché
Today we
avec
have
une grande
market,
organisation comme la Banque mondiale,
just like
les
the
banques mondiales,
World
les
Bank,
banques locales ne peuvent pas financer. Mais
the
ce qui
local
existe,
banks
c'est des
cannot
financements
provide
qui
funding.
peuvent aller directement vers les
If
privés
there are
pour
financing
nous permettre par exemple,
from
de
the
développer
private
encore
banks
beaucoup de capacités
to help us develop more
pour développer,
capability
notre secteur.
to develop our sector.
The question is it possible to find some private partners to finance? Because
Instead of
in most of cases, it's very difficult to find public partners. So the question is, est-ce que c'est possible de trouver des partenaires privés en fait?
Oui.
C'est ça, you know?
Yeah, I believe for businesses like yours, it should be rather easier as compared to some other type of green activities that do not generate any income. When we talk about infrastructure, for example, roads, some transport projects, those projects themselves, they don't generate any income. But as I have seen your project, I was fascinated because I used to come across an Indian gentleman who was doing trade between West Africa and India. He told me he was buying $100 million worth cashew from Burkina Faso alone. And it surprised me. That means the market demand for such products is huge. You only need to explore further to find private investors. I would encourage you to talk to the local finance community, and probably if you are looking for foreign investors, approach the embassies here, the France, the EU delegation, the Chinese, Americans. As long as you are able to prove to them you have so much interesting products to supply, everything organic, everything bio, the demand is huge throughout the world.
Et le marché demande une grande quantité.
Merci, je vous oublie pas, je viens.
Merci.
Thank you.
Merci au présentateur.
Thank you to the presenter.
Je voudrais juste
I'd like
faire une contribution
to contribute
et poser aussi une question.
and ask a
La
question as
contribution
well.
est la suivante.
My contribution
Nous, au
is
niveau de l'Afrique,
that in Africa
nous nous rendons compte effectivement
we
que
realize
les exploitants, de
that
façon générale,
people operating generally
au métier vert,
in the green
n'ont pas
business
accès au crédit.
do not have access to credit
Pour la simple
from the
raison
banks
que les taux
because
sont des taux réguliers, des taux très élevés.
the
Et vous avez de suite
interest
la question des taux
we
d'intérêt.
just talked about interest
C'est une
rate.
question très importante.
This is a very important question.
Sur lesquels on peut vraiment
This is
faire la fonction,
what we can work
atteindre les
on
résultats
to
escomptés
reach
dans les
the
cas
results expected
Alors,
through the
donc, je
programs.
voudrais savoir
I'd
si
like
vous
to know
pouvez
if you
donner
could
les adresses
give
nécessaires des banques
addresses
chinoises
of
ici,
Chinese banks
à l'ensemble des pays
here
qui
to
sont
the
présents.
people in the countries
Pour les
here in West Africa.
expériences, je
In
voudrais
terms
dire,
of experience
nous
sharing,
avons au niveau
I'd
de
like to
la
say
BCAO,
that African banks,
depuis un an,
since
nous avons
we are
initié donc des coopérations
cooperation between the
et certaines structures qu'on appelle
and certain structure of encadrement.
La BCAO, la Banque centrale a fait
Small
une
banks,
sélection des
they have
structures au niveau
made
de chaque
selections
État
in
pour
each
accompagner
state to
les
accompany the
dans
small
leur
businesses
encadrement. Et la Banque
by
centrale a mis des
giving them
ressources
training
au
and
niveau des
give
banques
them resources
secondaires.
in
Pour dire aux
secondary
banques secondaires,
banks
dès que le projet est éligible,
so that
de
when
financer ces projets
projects are eligible they can finance at their level with conditions of accompaniment to allow the young businesses to grow.
Si on a
If
les relais avec le banque
we
chinoise,
have a link with the Chinese banks,
au niveau de la
it
BAC,
will
la Banque centrale des
be
États de
more
l'Afrique
addition
centrale, et
in
la BCAO
African,
ensemble,
Central African,
pour qu'on puisse
West
mettre
Africa
des
banks
dispositions
together
et des
to
dispositifs
devices together, the disposition, set up structure that will facilitate access to credit with competitive interest rates. In addition to that, link with solar energy, we've seen the pictures of China. If we can have contacts on which we can components are not available immediately. There is cooperation to make them at our level and have them with a low price. This will be ideal. Will continue to be dependent on others. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think you have asked some of the most relevant and best questions that I have always heard from this region. Access to credit is not only a huge problem here in Africa. The SMEs, small medium enterprises in China, they face very similar situation, very difficult for them to access credit as well. And what I observed here in West Africa, having been working in the region for a few years, high interest rate is killing many projects. High interest rate is killing many of the green development projects. And it's extremely difficult. I totally share your observation. What I can only share from what I observed what China did. Since a few years, there has been a green movement in China. It's mostly because there has been too much pollution. If you ask some of your colleagues, friends who have traveled to China in the recent 3 to 5 years, they can prove to you, especially nowadays in winter, it's a lot of dust and pollution, the so-called smogs, very bad pollution, and a lot of people have lung diseases. So China has put in such an effort, and their intention was to tackle pollution. Then they realized they could actually do much more using these clean green activities to promote clean development. So one of the things they did is to force, through regulatory measures, the banks to lower their the interest when a green project is submitted to their desk. They put a cap. This is the maximum you are allowed to ask. And some other institutions, they put in like a target each year, how much loan, how much credit must be given to green activities. And then the central bank further back them up by taking up the risks through refinance. So the central bank would offer even lower cost credit to these commercial banks, who would then offer the loan to green business promoters. And I sense this is totally practicable in this region, because for agriculture projects, you really don't need a foreign currency denominated loan to implement it. Your domestic banking institutions and the finance regulators need to sit down with you to better understand the benefits of some of the initiatives you are taking. That's why at the end of my presentation, I strongly encourage you to engage with your finance authority, with your banking authority. I don't know if you have a stock exchange here. If you do you have insurance sector here? Then you could talk to your insurance, for example, your insurance regulator, to make sure that part of their portfolio has to be put and invested into green activities. And this is something Zimbabwe happened to have been doing for many years. They don't call it green. I forgot the terminology. Something like social benefits, investment with social benefit, or something, meaning that part of the insurance sector's investment has to be put into this type of activities. And obviously, for the contacts, I would be more than happy to share after the event. However, I'm personally not aware of a single Chinese bank that is operating and doing their business in Africa. I know the Standard Bank of South Africa. They have a share being owned by a Chinese bank, and then the Chinese many businesses they are implementing activities through the Standard Bank system, and they are doing their transactions also through the Standard Bank system. But until such, if I may be brave enough, until such opportunity come, why don't you talk to your banking regulator? Hey, let's sit down together and create a green investment bank. Let's create a national green investment bank, and we only do green business, and all the credit goes to green business to promote the green employment, because many countries already have this. It can be a bank, it can be a fund, it can be a guarantee. Because sometimes this is something maybe I can elaborate a little bit slower and a little bit more. Why our farmers, why our small businesses find it difficult to get a credit, to access finance? It's because you don't have a collateral. You don't have a guarantee. But your business, you know it. You know it's going to make profit. You know you are going to be able to pay back the loan. But you don't have a collateral. Then what do? Our public employment support service could set up a fund saying, I'm going to back you up to a certain limit. Then you sign an agreement together with a finance institution, meaning if you fail, then the National Green Employment Guarantee Fund would bail you out to a certain limit. That could be a mechanism you could explore domestically, because there are already successful examples.
Thank you. We thank you all. We thank the expert in relation to his presentation. My question is very simple, linked to the businessmen, entrepreneurs, because linked to the private initiatives presented by the ladies, most of them came here to explore possibilities of funding linked to the NCC. People are talking more and more of green funds. The green fund, what are opportunities, funding opportunities offered to the private sector? Because there are private initiatives, there are projects, many, but are looking for interventions, how to access to funds and other possibilities in relation with the with regional initiatives.
L'Agence panafricaine
The Pan-African Agency of the Great One is innovating financing tools through the UNDP. Someone may give compliment to this. It is a bank. There is a fund of adaptation linked to the innovative tools and try to exchange the possibilities of financing in innovation to fund in domains of climate and green domain. Thank you.
Could you please give a short answer because we have so many questions? Okay.
Okay, and thank you very much for the very good question. There's no standard answer, obviously, but what I have observed is many countries have set up their green fund already, and obviously being a green fund, you can only invest in green activities. So what I typically see, other countries in our region, they set up a green fund, they put some domestic resources into it, and at the same time, they use this as a mechanism to leverage more funding from, as you mentioned, adaptation fund. There is also GEF, Global Environment Facility, and there is also a newly created, relatively new, the Fund Vert, Global, Green Climate Fund. But those international mechanisms are typically very complicated, and the application process is very lengthy. So my recommendation is always try your best to engage with your domestic authorities, create such a mechanism using as much as possible your own resources. For example, my superficial research regarding Chad shows it's a country with huge amount of minerals, oil, gas. Maybe it's already set up, maybe it's not. If not, you could talk to your Ministry of Energy and Mines, tell them, why don't we have 2%, 5% of all the revenue coming from that sector? We put it into a green fund, and we predefine what is green in our country, what kind of projects can be supported. And probably by the time you set up the fund, you already have hundreds of people and businesses waiting to receive and to implement projects. My recommendation is always do as much as possible using domestic resources, because you don't want to get yourself into super complicated international mechanisms. But obviously, those mechanisms are useful. We have more questions.
Merci. Donc, on va encore prendre 2 ou 3 questions.
We can
Je
exchange
vais me
more
diriger
after.
vers... Voilà. Nous avons une question de nos amis kenyans. Donc, je vais leur donner le micro, please. My pleasure to give you the floor.
Thank you for the wonderful presentation. And it also gives me an opportunity to participate, because I've not been understanding very well other presentations, but it brightens me up that I've got almost everything that you are presenting. Now mine is a comment about, when you talk about the literacy levels among the school-going children in Chad. It gave me a concern, because we cannot sort out poverty, we cannot sort out the issue of unemployment without sorting out the literacy issue, without educating our children. In Kenya, that's where we started. And it's like we have almost 100%. Whole school, it's illegal to find a school-going child outside not going to school. So, and it's like we are sorting out social problems through that. Because you cannot talk of employment, telling someone to engage in self-employment if he doesn't know. We need to empower our people with knowledge. Because with the knowledge, you can make informed decision. We talk about energy. That is green energy. I'll give an example of our country, Kenya. Almost, we're we're almost getting rid of emissions when trying to generate energy. Because we're using hydro, we're producing power from hydro, we're producing hydropower. Oh, is it? Okay. Yeah. Yeah, we are using wind, we are using also solar, we are promoting solar, we are also using geothermal and also biogas to produce energy. At the moment we have the Big Four agenda, which is how we are focusing on at the moment, and which is going to assist us to create more jobs for our youth. We are focusing on agriculture, promoting agriculture for self-sustenance, food sufficiency. We're also promoting health, good health for our people. We're also trying to create houses, 500,000 units for our people. And also, we are promoting the manufacturing sector to assist our youth to get jobs. In all those four areas, we are creating jobs there. And we cannot achieve that if we cannot promote, if our population is not educated. So, in short, in Africa, we need to promote education. Because through education, we can be able to benchmark. We can be able to know what other countries are doing, how they have succeeded, so that we can apply that in our own situations. Otherwise, I thank you, and that's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comment. Probably I should use the opportunity to welcome the Honorable Minister for joining us. We are coming to the end of my session already. Christian, do we have more questions?
I think so. We have another one from our colleague Angelique from Congo. So let me go rapidly.
Merci pour votre exposé si brillant, Monsieur Yang.
Merci. Thank you for your exposure, for your presentation, Mr. Yang.
Je suis spécialement intéressé par le
I am
biodigester.
particularly interested by the biodigester.
Vous avez parlé de différentes sortes de
He
déchets.
talked about different sorts of waste. Is there a technicity for the building of the biodigester? And what kind of waste is to be put in? You talked about cow drops and manure. What is it about the human and poultry waste?
Thank you, Madam, for your very good question. I have personally seen very many biodigesters myself. There is a huge national program of biodigester in Burkina Faso and also throughout Eastern Africa. There are already many. We're talking about thousands of such biodigesters being already put into operation. We are talking about cow, sheep, pigs, chicken. If you have a chicken farm, you could rinse out their waste, let it flow into, because the biodigester, you can build a big one, you can build a small one, or you can build several small ones in parallel together. And tomorrow I will offer much more insight, more pictures, and for you to have a better understanding of the whole process and some of the utilization of biodigester. Apart from cooking, lighting, you have seen, and also you can use the gas to hatch eggs. I'm sorry? Yes, human waste can be used also. Because in my country, there are millions of biodigester. People in the rural side, they like to put a small biodigester in their backyard. So they usually have some poultry, chicken, duck, geese, and they would grow goats, pigs, if not cow, and they would flush all the waste, including human waste, into the biodigester. And within 1 day or two, it's a full of gas. And once you have it in place, it's a free energy for the whole household. And usually one biodigester is enough for your daily cooking and lighting needs. Thank you, madam.
Ok, est-ce que nous avons... Alors, je pense qu'on peut encore prendre
Une seule question, parce qu'après on va vraiment être pris par le temps.
We'll take one question because we are poor on time. Someone who has never asked a question.
Allez, on y va. Je suis désolée, c'est une seule question, mais
Sorry, one question that
de discuter avec
people are-
notre ami plus tard. Qui a levé la main, je sais.
It's a hand.
Non, mais ce monsieur n'a pas encore parlé.
No,
Allez,
yes,
on va faire des choix. Donc, monsieur,
We'll choose someone.
oui, je sais. On va essayer.
I know, I'll come back.
Thank you, Mr. Yang. My name is Ahmad Ismail from Chad. I ask you about what's the kind of the brick in India. India brick, what's the raw material using?
Raw material for what?
Brick.
Clays.
Clays, yeah.
Stones.
Yeah.
Yes. And about 2 weeks ago, I visited Abidjan to another event. There was a very interesting gentleman from Niger. He created an even more interesting construction material, and I forgot what it was. I apologize for that. There's always possibility for you to use local material to create something that can glue together, and you can use it for buildings. Like what you could do is you could use the structure, you use the traditional iron, steel, and cement, and then you fill up the space within the cement structure using your local material, which would also save you a whole lot of materials, which, again, it would be what I consider eco-practice. We could exchange more.
So, very last question.
Toute dernière question, si possible, très courte.
What question? This is a question.
Bien, merci.
Thank
C'est juste une
you.
observation.
Just an observation in relation to
Source des données que vous venez de...
the source of the data you just showed us.
Alors que vous avez parlé du Tchad,
You said about Chad, talked about Chad,
un document important qui a
and
permis au Tchad de
with
faire
reference or document that
sur le
help
CPR.
you
Contribution et
you send us to the side of the World Bank
de... Comment on appelle Banque africaine de développement.
and the African
Je
Bank
suis
of
vraiment
Development.
embarrassé.
I am
Pour la
embarrassed
simple raison que
for the simple reason
on nous a
that
invités
we were
à un
invited to a workshop
sur
on
la classe de changement de l'Afrique
the class of changing Africa.
en Égypte.
It was in Egypt.
Tous les participants
All the participants were surprised
pour leur valider.
that they gave us something to validate.
Les statistiques
We
venaient
realized that
parce que
it came from different sources.
d'accord sur les
Even the organizers could not agree. When you use national documents, please provide the source. This will help participants to look for the document, to consult this, just to add precision. Thank you.
Merci Merci pour
Thank you.
cette contribution.
Thank you for the
Je
contribution.
pense qu'on va clôturer là.
We can now
Merci beaucoup.
stop this.
Merci beaucoup.
We can round
Merci
up
beaucoup, Monsieur Gard, pour
this
cette
presentation. Thank you very much
Monsieur
for
Gard
your
aura l'occasion
contribution.
d'être avec nous encore demain. Il présentera un projet
And we
spécifique.
will
Donc on a pris
present
du
the
retard, comme vous
project.
pouvez l'imaginer.